Testing, microphone 1, microphone 1, testing, testing. Testing, testing, microphone 2, testing, testing. Testing, testing, microphone 4, testing, testing.
Jacksonville Developmental Center. So without any further ado.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys for having me. So how many of you know what the state of the states is? Okay, so a few of you. All right, well.
And before you say one more sentence, sorry. Those of you on the phone, it looks like the video webcam is working, so if you want to switch over to that, you should be able to access it. Thanks.
Okay, well, when Barry asked me, did we just get disconnected?
No, I think somebody signed off so they could go over to this.
Oh, okay. Like enough of that. So, when Barry asked me to come and talk about the state of the states for 90 minutes, I thought, you know, that's probably like a little cruel and unusual punishment. So I'm bringing BJ along to talk about the Jacksonville study as well. So the state of the states is a collaboration between the University of Colorado, which is the main university that the grant goes to, and they subcontract with the University of Illinois at Chicago. So a lot of you may have heard of David Braddock. He's the mastermind behind the project. And it is funded through the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and the Coleman Institute for Cognitive Disabilities. And the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities is also the entity that funds the University Centers for Excellence, which is what the Institute on Disability and Human Development, where I work, is, and what Equip for Equality is, the Protection and Advocacy Agency, and also the DD Council. They call it kind of the DD Network. And they also fund what they call projects of national significance. So that's what the state of the states is, a data collection project. We have an advisory committee, and we also partner with these entities to disseminate our information and to provide us input on the data that we're collecting. So we work with Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, which is a national self-advocacy organization, the National Youth Leadership Network, the National Council on State Legislators, is that it? The State Legislative Group, and Sibling Leadership Network. So they fund us for 5-year periods, and it takes about 2 years to do one cycle. So we just finished collecting data for 2012 and 2013, and the book literally just came out. I just got it yesterday. And then we're going to start data collection again in November. So we collect data for a year, we spend a year analyzing it, writing it up, getting it out there, and then we start all over again. We work with the state DD agencies to collect the data, and they all do this on a volunteer basis. So we are very indebted to them for providing this information. They've been providing it for over 25 years, and there's never been a state that hasn't provided this information. So it's really a partnership with all of the states. So we include all 50 states and the District of Columbia, and we just started working with the territories, which is pretty exciting. What's unique about our study is there's studies out there that look at just Medicaid data, but we collect the whole picture in terms of long-term services and supports. So we also capture the state general fund piece. So in Illinois, if you think about the DD grants, so we're capturing that information and any of the local funding so that we have a better picture of what a state is doing. And we like to say this isn't an accounting study, even though it's all financial data. It's really a policy study. It's a 30,000-foot study. I like to think of it as, okay, the DD agency has this much funding, and these are the choices that they're making of what to do with that funding. So this is a copy of the book. If anybody would like a copy, if you could write down your name and your address, I'll try and get you a copy. And it's published through the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that group. So we maintain a database that goes back to 1977. And so we're able to look at spending, long-term services and support spending over a longitudinal period. You can look state by state. You can look at your at your own state over time. You can look at regional differences. And our last study really looked at the impact of the Great Recession. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And there's two things on this graph that I'd like to point out. This shows total long-term services and support spending for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. That goes through the DD agency. So we don't collect stuff that goes through, say, for example, the Department of Voc Rehab. We're just the state DD agency. You can see in 2013 that across the U.S. we spent $61.6 billion on long-term services and support. So that's a lot of money. And you can see it goes up every year except in 2011. That was the first year that there was a dip in spending over the entire time that we've collected this data. This graph shows changes from year to year, and you can see where that dip is in 2011, and that was the only time. And we're still recovering from that. And if you look in the late 70s and early 80s, they were kind of the boom years. If you think about every year, it was growing at 6%, 8%, 10.3%. So we were really fortunate over that time that states were investing in their service system year after year. And then we see come 2003 or so on, it really slowed down. And then we took the hit, and then now we're slowly starting to recover. So we're clearly feeling this in Illinois, and they're feeling it all over the country. So 2011 was the last year for the last study, and then this study we went up through 2013. So there is a little bit of lag time in the data that we're able to collect from all the states. But we can look at 2011 to 2013, and you can see that 43 states increased their spending. So we're starting to recover from that Great Recession. And I can't figure out, I'm missing a state here, because we also include, no, that's right. So we have 50 states and DC. So Illinois increased their spending 3.9%. The average state increased their spending during this time 8.5%. So we're not quite at the national average, but we are increasing spending. So this shows how many states decreased spending each year, and you can really see during that Great Recession, almost half the states were cutting their spending every year. So you're going deeper and deeper. You're going the wrong direction. You're having to do more with less. And in 2011, 31 states cut their spending. So what does spending for long-term services and supports look like? So one of the ways that we look at how states fund their service system is we look at how much they spend on what we call institutional services, and that's services for 16 or more people living together. And it could be in one building, it could be a campus kind of thing. It's where they're together. And then we look at community services, which we define as 15 or less. Eventually, we'd like to get that number smaller, but we have to do the lowest common denominator. So we have to report on what every state can report to us in the same way so that we can compare across the states. And you can see here, so 10% of funding went to public institutions, which in Illinois we call state-operated developmental centers, or SODCs. 3% went to private institutions, so these are typically Medicaid funded, but they're operated by private agencies. And then there's a little bit of funding in settings for 7 to 15. And so in Illinois, we have a lot of 8-bed SILAs. They would fall in this pie slice. You can see 3% went to fund ICFs for 4 to 6 people. So there are community ICFs that have 4, 5, 6 people. But the majority went to 6-person or fewer residential homes or community supports. And that's 58%. So these white pieces are what we call, on the State of the States project, individual and family supports, IFS. So you can see that 1% teeny little slice is for supported employment. And 7% is supporting individuals to live in the family home. So just a little piece. and 13% is going towards supported living and personal assistance, where the individual lives in their own home. They decide who they live with. They have a plan that changes every year to support them, but the agency doesn't own the home. So they could choose a different provider and they would still have their home. And that's what we consider kind of the gold standard. Another way that we look at how the states are doing is this measurement called fiscal effort, and this confuses some people. It's an economics term. What we're doing is we're controlling for state wealth. So it's how much funding per $1,000 of statewide personal income goes to long-term services and supports. So in Illinois, of every $1,000 of personal income for everybody in the state, $2.70 goes. And just to put this in perspective, the average state spends $4.40. So you have $2.70 for Illinois, $4.40 for the nation, for the average state. So we rank 43rd on that measure. It's really the state commitment to funding DD services. When you control for state wealth, you can compare, for example, New York to Mississippi, and it's a meaningful comparison. This total fiscal effort includes institutional services and community services. So we also break it down to how much of that goes to institutions, how much goes to the community. So community fiscal effort in 2013 was $2.01 out of that 270. And the average state spent $3.81. So again, $2, $3.80. So a little bit different. So we ranked 47th on that measure.
Mary Kate, some folks who are on the phone are having a hard time knowing which slides. If you just, I don't think
Sure.
the slides are numbered, but if you could just kind of say
so I
the
am
name.
on slide, I think it's 13,
Okay.
Where it has a map of the United States that has dollars on the map. The title says Compare Fiscal Effort Across Programs and States.
Thanks.
And so I'm moving to the next slide. So why is Medicaid so important to people with developmental disabilities? In 2013, Medicaid funded 78% of long-term services and supports. Over half of long-term services and supports is funded through the Home and Community-Based Services Waiver. Are you guys familiar with the HCBS waiver? So that was authorized in 1981 under the Reagan administration. It was a win-win. Some people saw it as a cost-saving strategy because by definition, it has to be cheaper to provide services in the waiver than it does in the ICF. But advocates liked it because it provided flexibility and they could tailor the services to what they wanted and what they needed. In 2013, there were over 686,000 people with developmental disabilities supported through waivers across the country. So on the next slide, another way that we measure how states are performing is we look at their spending on the waiver, since it is such a critical program for people with developmental disabilities. And there is a slight error in here. That's what I get when I recycled a presentation from a few months ago. The data has changed, so Illinois is actually 45th. Georgia moved down. So if you see, we spend $49 per capita, and that's just controlling for the general population so that you can still compare across the states. The average state spent $100, so twice what we did. You can also look, go ahead.
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
On the fiscal efforts.
Okay, we have a question on fiscal effort.
Okay.
Going back.
Has Illinois' community fiscal effort improved as compared to the institutional fiscal effort, like since the last report?
Yes, you can see in the book, and I will send you a book, it's on page 124, our fiscal effort has declined. It was up at, as high as 321 back in 97, 317 in 2009. The community is staying pretty consistent, and institutional service fiscal effort is going down. So we're decreasing the commitment towards institutional services, and it looks like the community is staying pretty consistent. So that's why our total is going down.
Okay, we're not switching.
So we're not reinvesting those dollars, I would assume, from the institution to the community.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So back to, oh, wait. Okay, we're on this slide, federal state waiver spending per capita. Another way that we look at this is spending by region. And you can see they're doing much better in the Northeast and New England regions on their waiver commitment than we are in the Great Lakes. But at least we're not in the Southeast. I can say that, I'm from North Carolina. So a few years back, we decided to look more closely at the waivers. So we found 88 different DD waivers, all the waivers that we could collect for that year. And we looked at what services they were offering, how much they were paying for those services or proposing to pay for those services. And we compiled over 1,300 definitions from these waivers, and we put them into these groups. So 1,300 definitions, we got them down to 18 buckets to create this taxonomy of services. And you can see these are kind of the big categories that states are funding. So residential services, homemaker personal assistance services, a little bit of pre-voc and family training and counseling, transportation. So we have these 18 categories. And on the next slide, ooh, that didn't show up. Okay. So the majority of spending, 53% of the spending, states allocated towards residential services, or in the waiver that may be a bundled package as well. So this was almost 5 times as much as they allocated towards supported living, personal assistance, chore, and homemaker combined, which was 11% as well.
You just had to click it extra times for it to come on.
Oh,
I got it.
awesome.
Yeah.
Not very pretty colors, but so another interesting thing that we found was states were allocating 6 times as much for day-hab as they were for supported employment. And then 15% of funding was allocated for everything else. So if you look at that, you can see, only 1% of the waivers were allocated towards assistive technology, for example. Less than 1% for self-advocacy training. 1% for respite. So where do people with developmental disabilities live? Mostly they live with their family caregivers, or they live on their own. So 71% are living with a family caregiver. 1% of the waiver is going to provide respite. So we are really relying on unpaid natural supports to fund our long-term services and support system. So about 13% of people with developmental disabilities get formal out-of-home residential services. About 635,000 people in 2013. And this is where they live. Largely, 80% of them live in settings for 6 or less. So smaller group homes, foster care. The 46% of that 80% is supported living and personal assistance settings. We used to see that the fastest growing residential setting was group homes, but in the last few studies we're seeing it's more supported living. And then you can see 4% each of these congregate settings in the dark blue. So there are about 25,000 people in public institutions, or what we call SODCs in Illinois, another 22,000 in private institutions, and about, is that 26,000 or so in nursing homes. And we don't really know much about the people with developmental disabilities in nursing homes, whether they are elderly and that's an appropriate placement or not. We just know that that's how many people are there. And then there's about 9% of the service system in these settings for 7 to 15. And a lot of that is Illinois' 8 beds. New York has a lot of 15-bed homes. So on the next slide, you can see that roughly a quarter of people with developmental disabilities are at home living with aging caregivers. So there's going to be an increased demand on the service system when aging caregivers outgrow their capacity to provide support to their family members. So that's something that we need to start thinking about. This chart shows how many people with developmental disabilities live with families, and this is estimated because we don't really know how many people with developmental disabilities there are in the U.S. So we use a prevalence rate, and then we use census data. We take into account the aging of the population and come up with an estimate. And you can see in 2013, about 13% of families got formal family support services through their state DD agency. So again, most families are not getting anything. They're using unpaid natural supports. On the next slide, it shows inflation-adjusted family support spending, and you can see it declined. This is adjusted. These are in real 2013 dollars. And total spending declined from $4.2 billion in 2011 to $4.1 billion in 2013. And just anecdotally, we hear a lot about the states cutting family support programs and respite programs because it's easier to cut a family program than it is to close a residential service. So families are the ones that are taking the hit typically, if it's not dental services. And this shouldn't, it says 78% is waiver funding, but it's actually 82% is waiver funding. So it used to be back in the 80s, you see that family support programs were pretty much funded with state dollars, state general fund dollars. So there was a lot of flexibility. And then we start seeing them become medicated in 96. So that they could get that matching funding from the federal government. So it increased the amount of funding they had, but it decreased some of the flexibility. So I know you guys are interested in trends in state institutions across the country. And we look at institutions that have closed and also ones that are in the process of being closed. So there were 176 that we've identified. This might be 175. I'm not sure if we have Murray in here or not. I'm not sure where that falls. There are 13 states in the District of Columbia that do not operate state institutions, although just a caveat, Minnesota actually does have a few dozen people in a psychiatric institution that has a wing devoted to people with developmental disabilities. It's called the MADO unit, so I don't think they should be in here. So this is for state institutions. A lot of these, maybe half of these, Vermont, I think Alaska, Alabama, Oregon, they don't have private institutions either. So they're operating their systems completely in the community.
That would include nursing homes as well?
Yeah. Well, no, everybody has people in nursing homes, but we don't know if it's an appropriate setting or not.
Okay, that's what you're saying.
So who is next? These dozen states have less than 200 people in state institutions. So some of them are smaller states, a couple of them, but this just kind of shows the states that may be next to close and who is not. These states show, this is a list of the 9 states that have over 1,000 people in state institutions. And you can see that there are 2 states that have more people in state-operated facilities for 16 or more than Illinois, New Jersey, and Texas. So on the next slide, this shows, we saw that 175, 176 institutions have closed. There are 153 that remain, and they are operated in 37 different states. So 10 states have 1 institution, and then other states have multiple. For example, Illinois, you see, has 7. We're near the top. New York has 24, but there are these mini institutions. The average size is 42 people. And how much does it cost to operate a state institution? The average cost around the nation in 2013 was over $700 a day. It's lower in Illinois. I believe it's like $412 or so. So it's lower than this, but still a pretty high per diem. Yes.
Is that per person or is that per institution?
It's per person, average per person
day.
per day. So, yes.
In terms of the census data, is there a number, maybe you address this, like sort of per capita? Some states obviously have larger populations.
Yes, and that is in here.
Can you repeat the question? Okay.
So the question was not just the absolute raw number of people in state institutions, but once you control for the general population, so a more populous state may have more people. And we do, I don't have it memorized, I used to. I've worked on the states, this is my 18th year, and when I was a grad student, I was like eager and I had every number memorized, and now I'm like, oh, I can look that up. So that we do have utilization data. So, and hopefully, let me see if I can find it really quickly for you. If not, I will find it after. So utilization rate. So in Illinois, our utilization rate is 13.9, and the average state is 7.8. So we rank 43rd. So not as bad as if you take into account our population. If that makes everybody feel better. So since we collect data going back to 1977, we're able to look at trends over time. And the state institution census peaked in, I think it was 1967, around 195,000 people across the country. It's decreased every year since then by 4 to 5% on average. So if you look at those trends, just keeping a similar projection, then we would no longer have state institutions by 2024. However, things have changed a little. There's a few states that are a little more invested in state institutions and a little less likely to close some of them. So if you take them into account, maybe 2029. This is a projection by David Braddock. So, I mean, we'll see. Things change every year. Yes.
Do most states take new admissions, or are these numbers just naturally declining as people die?
There are new admissions. There's a study by the University of Minnesota. It's called the RISP. So we look at the big picture. The RISP looks at residential services. They look at admissions, deaths, and discharges. And so you can see state by state how many people were admitted, how many people left, how many people died. I was looking at the data yesterday, and some of the interesting trends that I saw were back in the 70s, there was 35% or so of the population were children under the age of 21. Now that makes up only 4% of the population. It looked like certain states were using them for specific populations. So one state may use a facility for individuals who were deaf and blind. One may use them for individuals with behavioral issues that were on multiple psychotropics. So they have that information in there. And again, that's the RISP, and that is available online. Another thing that was interesting was looking at the role that state institutions played in these states. Some of them were playing roles for people who were living in the community. So they would come to the state institution to get dental services, or they would come for behavioral therapy or respite. And over the years, the percent of institutions that are playing that role for behavioral supports is declining. So I believe that communities are becoming better able to support individuals with complex behavioral needs in the community and health needs. But we are seeing a big role still for dental. So that's something that we have to address, is how to provide dental supports in the community. And I can send a link to that report if anybody would like to see that. That's another what they call project of national significance. So we work closely with them, and there's another one in Boston that collects employment data. So together we try and create a picture of all the services for people with developmental disabilities. And This is the web address where you can go and make your own graphs. This is located at the University of Colorado on their website, which is where the home of the State of the States project. And these on the next slide show some of the things that you can look at, and you can choose Illinois and compare it to the US. You can choose Illinois and compare it to Indiana. You can look at regional groupings. You basically pick whatever states you want to include in the analysis, and then these are your options for the variables that you can look at. So that fiscal effort, and it'll make you a chart, or it'll provide you with the table data. So this can be used in your own presentations if that's helpful to you. So you can look at fiscal effort. You can look at what % of total DD services is allocated towards community-based supports. You can look at how many people are in settings for 6 or fewer versus larger settings, the caregiver data, that individual and family support data. So that's all on there, and you can, make your own chart.
Mary Kay, we had a question on the webcam.
Yes.
Can you spell the name of the Minnesota study?
So it's RISP, R-I-S-P, and
Is that an acronym or something? Or?
yes,
Okay.
something residential. Oh, I feel awful.
But if they put risk study,
If they
it would
put
probably show up
on
in Google.
And yeah, on Google you can type Minnesota RISP. The principal investigator is Amy Hewitt, H-E-W-I-T-T, and Sherry Larson, L-A-R-S-O-N. So that can get you there.
Yeah, and we'll just, it sounds like we can get some links from Mary Kay after this
Yes.
presentation, and then I'll share that with everybody
Yes,
online.
and that is out of the Minnesota USAID, which is our sister USAID in Minnesota. And they've been doing that work for a long time too. So on the State of the States website, you can also download a 6-page profile for all the states. So it has more information. In the book, we have a condensed profile, 2 pages for each, just to make the book more accessible, able to carry around. But we have a full 6-page profile for each of the states, and it has more information there on aging caregivers for each state, where money is going to, how many people live where, more information on supported employment, on supported living, and family support. So that might be helpful to you. And then here are just some facts. We like to rank the states just to put everything in perspective. And so this provides you with some of the rankings for Illinois. And many of you remember when we used to say we were 51st. You remember that? But nobody knew what it meant. So when you look at the residential pie and you see where are people living, and you look at how many people are living in settings for 6 or less, and the US average is 80%. Remember when I said, yeah, most people live in 6 or less? In Illinois, it's 50%. So we rank 50th. But we beat Mississippi, who only has 35% of their system in six or less. But both Mississippi and Illinois are trying to rebalance those systems.
Right, because I think when we filed legacy, we were at 35%. So it seems like it's
Yes.
increased over the years. And then, as you said, even though a lot of people move in the community under Ligas, a lot of them are moving into 8-person facilities, and so that wouldn't be accounted because you
Yeah.
guys cut it off at 6.
Yeah, I don't know if they're moving into the 8, but I know we utilize a lot of 8-bed in the state. I don't know whether they've just been there a while or if there are new 8 beds.
Sure.
I know I thought I heard that there was a preference for 4-bed, or I'll leave that to the lawyers. So aging caregivers, there's approximately 33,000 people with DD living with a caregiver over the age of 60. And just to put in perspective, we support about 29,000 people in out-of-home residential. And you guys are familiar with the PUNS data. There's 10,000 people that are waiting for residential services. So we would need a big expansion in our long-term services and support system to address people who are awaiting services, and potentially to address people that may need services in the future as caregivers age. Individual and family support. We spend $9.70 per capita on supported living and personal assistance, compared to the average state, which spends $24.92. Supported employment, we spend 68 cents per capita. And the average state spends $2.76. So it's bad everywhere, but very bad in Illinois. We do rank 24th in spending per family in family support programs. However, we rank 44th in the number of families. So we don't support as many families as the average state, but we do give them more money than the typical state. And then on the last slide, there's some more rankings, and these are more about financial commitment. So as I mentioned before, we rank 43rd in total fiscal effort, which is just our commitment to funding DD services, long-term services and supports. 47th if you narrow it down to just community, and 45th in terms of our spending per capita on the waiver. So on that happy note, I'm gonna, more questions? Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, how is this information presented to like the governor's office and the legislature? It's a lot of important information.
Yes, we usually make a cheat sheet of the rankings and send that to the legislators. People who want to meet with their legislators, we will help you create briefs or fact sheets that to make sure that the data is accurate and that it's presented in a way that could be understood. So that's part of our role as a project, is to provide technical assistance. It's our mission to get that information out there because we spend so much time collecting it that we want it to be used when decisions and policies are made. We're always making PowerPoints for people who are presenting to their legislators across the country. We work closely with the National Association of State DD Directors. We publish in the NCSL, the National Committee on State Legislators. I forget what the C is each time. So we try and get that information out there in as many ways as we can. And especially that's where the create a chart comes in handy, so that you can tailor it to whatever message you're trying to share. So, but if anybody needs help creating those charts or interpreting the data, or if they'd like a copy of the book, contact me and I'm happy to help you do that. And I've presented to I've gone to talk to staffers and things to present this information.
Can you give your contact information? I don't think it's on the PowerPoint.
I'm sorry. So my email is MRIZZO3. There's two other M Rizzo at uic.edu. So mrizzo3 at uic.edu.
Any other questions on the state of the states before we move on to the Jacksonville topic?
All right, thanks.
Thank you for coming. I'll be talking about our evaluation of the Jacksonville closure. And what I'll be doing is I'll just be going over very briefly about what we did, how some of the results we came up with, because there were 3 phases to our study, and some of the recommendations we made for the state, and some of our conclusions that we came up with. This is general information about Jacksonville. It opened up in the mid-1800s. The census peaked at the around 1890s. And then Governor Quinn announced the plan to close in January of 2012. And so we began our evaluation in 2013. I believe, was it the spring, or it's sometime in 2013, because we ran into some of the issues with our IRB and stuff like that to make sure we were ethical. This chart shows the number of people leaving Jacksonville by fiscal year, and it generally has been steady across every year, starting in the early 2000s, about 10% per year. Then in 2013, you can see in fiscal year 2013, when it closed, we had the big jump of the number of people who transitioned out of Jacksonville. The next slide talks about the different methodology we used. We had 3 phases. The first phase was we surveyed legal guardians of people who transitioned out, who left Jacksonville. This is both state guardians as well as family guardians as well. We interviewed key stakeholders. This could be anyone with a professional capacity within the Jacksonville closure. Could have been staff, someone from the DD agencies, or anyone like that in the world. Finally, we interviewed individuals who left Jacksonville. We asked them again. We had to ask the guardians for their consent to contact their family members who left Jacksonville. And from there, we had about 18 individuals, 18, 19 people who we got consent for, and we were only able to talk to 15. So in the phase 1 guardian survey, we surveyed we sent out a mailing to all 180 guardians. And from there, we initially got about 30 surveys back. And we just needed more people, so we did another mailing of all 180, and we got back about another 33. So we got a total of 65 respondents out of the 180. And these were the 6 topic areas that we discussed, that we were asking about. We asked some general demographic questions, the satisfaction with the decision, with the services that they received at Jacksonville, the satisfaction with the decision to close it, their satisfaction with the transition process and what went on during the transition process, their satisfaction with the new home placement and the services that they're receiving there, and just different visitation patterns, like how long it takes them to get to their new home, about how frequently they visit, and just their personal opinions on about how their family members are doing. So we got about 33% back, and this is pretty typical for studies like this. One of the biggest criticisms that we've gotten has been who is responding to our surveys. People always say, like, oh, it must be state guardians who are responding to the survey. However, in our situation, 88% of the respondents were some kind of family member. They were parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, people like that. The majority of the respondents were older, at least 65 years old, female or white, and you could generally think of it would be like the moms responding to the survey. The stakeholder interviews, we interviewed 53 people across the state. They were all done in person. We audio recorded every single one, and then we transcribed them. And we had a team of about 6 of us who went over every page and coded them and came up with themes to come together. And these interviews took about an hour to 2 hours. Some people like to talk less. Some people like to hear themselves speak. So we went through a lot of audio tape to listen to it. And finally, the interviews, like I said, we interviewed 15 individuals. 12 were living in a community placement, and 3 were in another SODC. And these were a little more challenging. We had accessible interview guides. The 3, we were saying, like, we had a few people who we could not interview, even with, because some of them might not be able to communicate with us, even though we had accessible interview guides so that they could respond. We worked with our ATUs, our Great Lakes Center, to try and make it as accessible as possible. We took time. We had the care attendants with them if they knew what they were trying to tell us. And we just couldn't interview some of the individuals. We tried though. So we took all 3 of these data points. Initially, when we wrote up the report, we talked about each one individually, but for us, it just didn't make sense as a story, like what's going on during the whole process. So for this presentation, we combined them all into a pre-transition, transition process, and then post-transition, what happened. And then the next slide is talking about the initial satisfaction with the decision to close Jacksonville. And overwhelmingly, more than 75% were dissatisfied with the decision to close it, with almost 70% being very dissatisfied with the decision. And just about 17% were satisfied, either somewhat or very satisfied with the decision. These quotes are from individuals who left Jacksonville, and their opinions varied. Some were very happy to leave, and others were angry because they did not know. And the primary method that they heard about it was from the media. They either saw it on TV, read about it in the newspaper, or heard about it on the radio. And some of the stakeholders, when they were describing the reaction to the closure, they said that the media, according to the stakeholders, was biased towards keeping it open or against the closure. And so that was, according to the stakeholders, the kind of stigma that we were trying to face.
Okay, and we had the file got corrupted, but the handout you have has the slides that look blank on the screen, but they're in your handout.
So this slide is titled "Benefit from a Move to the Community," and what it shows is we asked the guardians to initially how much they agreed with the statement, "My family member would benefit from a move to the community, into a community placement," and 2/3 disagreed with that statement, saying that their family members would not benefit from a move to the community. And we asked the question again later about how they currently felt, but we'll go over that in a few slides. The ACCT, the ACT process, was discussed in the stakeholder interview. They generally felt that it was a positive experience and process, saying that we just tried to make it personal to each individual and make it so that we fit their needs. The person-centered planning meetings kind of fell in line with what the ACT process was talking about. And here, there again, they tried really hard. This is one of the stakeholders saying that the assessment and the person-centered planning writing were very well done, that they looked carefully at what the individual needed and worked with them. This table shows the pre-transition process. We asked multiple questions about whether or not the guardian received timely updates on their relative's transition, whether they felt that the information that they got was adequate or not, whether or not they visited the agency prior to their family member moving. And finally, the last few questions were about their relative visiting their new home before moving. And this could have been, how long was it a short visit, about 3 hours or less? Was it a day visit, like more than 3 hours, but not overnight? And finally, an overnight stay at the new home. And what caught my eye throughout this whole thing, only 20% of the respondents said their family members visited the new home before they moved. Oh, sorry, before an overnight stay.
BJ, do you know, did people have a choice and they just chose not to, or was it just sort of randomly some people were able to and some people weren't?
So that was actually some of the next slides I was talking about. That's okay. But some of the reasons that they were mentioning from the stakeholders were that they didn't want they would go for a day visit and it went really well. And they didn't want to confuse the individual by moving them back to the SODC and then coming back again. So if it went really well, according to the stakeholders, sometimes they just stayed there. And then it's one of the interesting points about this analysis. And next we'll go into the transition process. And this chart shows the satisfaction with the closure process, and the somewhat satisfied value is not showing, but just over half, just a little over half, were satisfied with the transition process. So maybe about 52% were satisfied, with nearly half being very or somewhat dissatisfied. Next slide. So this slide is not showing up again. This one's titled "Closer Satisfaction by Whether Opinions Were Respected." On the left table, or the left column, shows opinions were respected, and the right column were opinions not respected. 21 individuals stated, or 21 family members stated that their opinions were not respected. Every single one of them stated that they were dissatisfied with the closure. If they felt, of the other 44 individuals who said that their opinions were respected, 3/4 were satisfied with the closure process. So the next slide is going to talk about perceived receipt of adequate information by the satisfaction of the closure process. If the family member perceived that they did not receive enough or adequate information, 3/4 were dissatisfied with the closure process. If they perceived that they did receive enough information, they were satisfied. Nearly 3/4 felt that they were satisfied with the closure process. And finally, this next slide, which is again not showing, is whether or not their relative visited their new home prior to the move. If the parent or family member said that their relative did not visit any home prior to the move, almost 2/3, about 65%, were dissatisfied with the closure process. If they at least visited one facility prior to the move, 71% were satisfied with the closure process. So if we sit back and we think about what's going on during this whole transition process, if it's common sense, you treat them with respect, you give them information about the new home, and you at least visit the new home. And if we think about us moving to a new facility, or moving to a new home for us, it makes sense. We would want to visit the new place where we're going to move, get information about it, and know as much about it prior to us moving. And whoever is showing it to us, we would want us to feel respected by them. So it's fairly common sense. We asked the parents and guardians if they felt that the closure process felt rushed, like if they felt it was too fast, about right, or too slow. The majority of them felt that it felt rushed. And when we compared the feeling of it being too fast versus the satisfaction with the closure process, those who felt it was too fast were less likely to be satisfied with the closure process. The stakeholders provided some examples of why the closure process might have felt rushed. Some of them stated that the guardians who were against the closure might have waited to get involved in the ACCT process earlier on. And so because of that, they waited, or they might have been hoping that Jacksonville would have never closed. And so because of that, they had to wait till the very end, and then they'd have to push through the whole process as quickly as possible because it was going to close. Others said that the providers were working around the clock to make sure that the homes were ready and accessible for them. And so because of that, they just felt like, again, these are some of the reasons that the stakeholders claimed that it was feeling rushed. Communication was another big issue that came up from the stakeholders. Some of them stated that there were no less than that they could identify 4 people who were in charge. So the people involved in the closure had no idea who to go to for information, with one of them saying that they believe that 4 people were in charge of the process that they could identify depending on who it was. The Jacksonville staff played a very critical role throughout the entire closure, and some of the stakeholders claimed that the staff knew what was going on with the individuals best. They were the ones who worked with them on a day-to-day basis, and so they were able to help inform the nuances of them throughout the entire closure process. So the person-centered planning meetings, this person said like, oh, this person had this quirk, and so they knew how to work with them best. But the issue that came up with this was that staff would leave, and because they knew who they were the best, people who were towards the end of the closure process, they might not have had the staff there to explain the little nuances during the person-centered plans. So because of that, some of the stakeholders said that the staff towards the end would just look at the charts, and they would not have the intimate knowledge of what went on, of how best to help the individual throughout the whole closure process. The choice of providers was an interesting concept. Some of the family members said that they had no choice. Some of them said that they had some choice as to where their family member moved to. The stakeholders claim like they tried really hard to show as many places as possible, give as much information. And this one is they tried to make it available for everybody. The choice of home was always interesting, especially we'll get to another quote from an individual who left. There was some discrepancy. Some of them the individuals wanted to live in an apartment, but their family member wanted them to like live in a SILA or an SODC, but they wanted more independence. So they would err on the side of the guardian. This chart here talks about the first choice of setting for family members versus where they actually moved to. Every single family member who wanted their family member to move to a SILA got a SILA. Half of the people who wanted their family member to move to an ICF got an ICF, and the other 4 went to a SILA. And then for those who wanted another SODC as their first choice, just about half got another SODC for their first choice. 8 moved to a SILA, and then 6 moved to a private ICF. So we don't know why they might have moved to SILA. Maybe they visited SILA, they liked what they saw, and they said, okay, this is great, let's go with it, or we don't know.
It could have also been a discrepancy between what the guardian initially wanted and what the individual wanted.
Right.
Or it might have been a temporary move, or we don't know. So now the post-transition, this is actually where things get a little better. So the satisfaction with, is this in the slide that's not coming up? Okay. This one shows the satisfaction with the new home. And regardless of which home they moved to, almost over 90% were satisfied with the new home. So some of the criticism that we also received about this was that these individuals were moving to another SODC. So we actually controlled for that. We looked at people who only moved to a non-SODC setting. And so it went down to like about 89% were still satisfied with the new home. So overall, they're satisfied with where they're moving to. And the next slide, we'll talk about some of the reasons why they were satisfied. And generally, some of them moved that they were closer to their family members, or that they were satisfied with the home and the staff. But what was almost universal was that their family members did not want them to move to the Chicago area. So they were satisfied with everything else but the location. And so, but this might have been because the services were here or whatnot, but they liked the home. So these are some of the quotes from former Jacksonville residents about some of the positive aspects about their new home. They liked it. They had freedom of activities that they can choose, things to do. They have increased privacy. Some of the guardians stated that they had more privacy. The sound did not echo as much, and the family member responded better to a quieter environment. So the smaller setting worked best for them. So there were a lot of positive outcomes that came from the new trained homes. This is a quote I was saying earlier, where a former Jacksonville resident wanted to leave the SODC by 2020, but their mom felt that they should stay a little longer. So they were ready for an apartment, but we don't know where they actually moved to. So overall, they had a desire to move to a more independent setting. This next slide talks about satisfaction with the new home, staff, and roommates. And overwhelmingly, everyone felt that their new home was in a safe environment, regardless of setting. Almost all the respondents said that their family member received adequate supervision, that their family members liked the staff at the new home, and about over 80% said that their family members got along with their roommates. So it's a very positive outcome of the new homes. All the good slides are not showing up. This one is talking about, we asked family members, as compared to when your family member lived at Jacksonville, do you think that they are better or worse off? So this chart shows, it's a pie graph that shows almost 2/3 of the family members said that their family members were better off, either very significantly better or somewhat better than compared to Jacksonville. and just about a quarter felt that they were about the same compared to when they lived in Jacksonville. And that's about as good as we would want. We want them to do at least as good or better. And this is what the family members were saying. According to the Guardians, they said that they just look better. They have more color to them. They're eating better. And this is, the other one says is that he's content with where he is. He looks a little healthier because the meals that they offer offer more variety. He's allowed to make and tap on makeshift drums for longer durations, which makes them happier. The home doesn't have the echoes of the large day room had at Jacksonville, and their relative got upset by the loud noises, so the smaller setting was preferable and turned out better. We asked them to compare their satisfaction towards the Jacksonville closure, and 46% felt more positive towards their initial reaction towards the Jacksonville closure, with 50% feeling about the same, and just 3% feeling more negative towards the Jacksonville closure. The next slide is going to compare initial and current satisfaction levels. So when we surveyed the Guardians, we asked them initially to think back to when they heard about the Jacksonville closure, how they felt about their satisfaction towards this closure, and then how they currently felt. And then overall, more and more people are feeling satisfied, either somewhat or very satisfied toward the closure, with nearly half feeling more positive towards this closure, while the biggest decrease was from very dissatisfied, went from near 70% felt very dissatisfied to just 36.5% feeling that they currently were dissatisfied with the decision to close Jacksonville. These are some of the recommendations we made to the state. We told them to support the individuals, to arrange visits whenever possible, and if they could not accommodate and allow them to visit the new home, to use other materials, use technology to their advantage, maybe show them a Skype visit so that they could tour the home virtually, meet the staff member there. And if not, provide other materials for them, give them written materials, give them a DVD, so that some other mechanism so that they can tour the home and see what's coming up with them. And then during the transition days, during the moving days, to make it as comfortable for them as possible, give them have the SODC staff available for them to let them be at ease when they move. Have their family members move with them, and let the new home staff greet them when they move there. So whatever they can do to make them feel most comfortable. If they have like a familiar object with them, let them move with that. This is the tougher one, like supporting the families during the closure process. So one of the things that the stakeholders said was that if the families waited, they were more likely to feel rushed. And so our encouragement to the state was to get the family members who are against the closure, try to get them involved earlier in the process, and leave the family members who were supportive of the closure towards the end, because then they can go through the whole process quicker because they're already pro-closure. And by doing the very similar thing, so this way they're involved earlier on in the process, meeting with the staff, get them involved, so this way they can see like it's not rushed, let them visit new homes. Again, and then use the technology when possible. If they cannot visit the new home, let them provide, tour the home, meet the staff virtually or in person. And one of the more interesting, or for me, interesting recommendations we gave was to have a contact person so the family members can get in touch with, and use other information to get about the closure out, so that their family members are not just hearing about the closure from the media, and we're providing a constant level of accurate information about the closure. And then have family members who've gone through the closure, successfully transitioned out, talk with the family members who are still going through it, so that they can tell them the little nuances or what to expect, what to look forward to, and help them out throughout the whole process. And finally, communication between and within SODC staff and with the provider agency. Many of the staff said that they had confusion about who was in charge, what was going on. Some of them stated that they did not know an individual was leaving Jacksonville that day. So some of the simple things as identifying a key contact person at the SODC as to who the staff can go to talk about to get reliable information. Have a calendar set up with the dates set aside for the person-centered planning meetings and for when an individual was scheduled to transition out of the SODC. Little simple things like that. For the provider agency, make sure that they identify key contact at the SODC so that they can get reliable information about who is transitioning out and moving in with them. And having a checklist to see what they're leaving the SODC with and what they might require when they move in, so that those are there. Some of the stakeholders said that some individuals left Jacksonville and came in without any hygiene products, like no toothbrush or toothpaste or something like that. So making sure that that situation does not happen again, and maybe having electronic records to keep everything consistent across everybody. Finally, the conclusion. The process still needs work, but the outcomes are still generally positive and look similar to what the other deinstitutionalization literature has shown, that the individuals have more choice, they have more freedom in what comes with that. So what we're doing now is that we are now in the process of we're going to start surveying guardians of family members who have left an SODC, but were not part of a closure. So we're looking back through fiscal year 20, fiscal year 14, and through half of fiscal year 15, through December 31st. So we're going to be starting the surveys hopefully soon. We're trying to mitigate issues of the response rate and trying to increase and get as many respondents as possible. And so we're still working with the state now to get their clearance, and then we're going to, once we get that going, we're going to start surveying as quickly as possible. That's it.
A couple of quick ones. How long would somebody have been transitioned before they would be surveyed?
This for Jacksonville?
Yeah.
Year and a half.
Okay. And then with the staff, I mean, given sort of, they're losing their jobs, and so did you factor into any of their responses sort of their own personal interest as far as how that played? And it's kind of hard to do, but it would seem like that would be kind of a loaded person to be talking to, given the other issues going on with them.
We did talk to some Jacksonville staff in the interview. We cannot say how many or who, because of like identification and confidentiality issues. But yeah, we did take that into account because they are losing their jobs and might be having to go to a lower paying job. But
and is there a link or some way people could access the results of your study?
It's on the web. If you, we can send that to you as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's online.
It's lengthy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hidden because our DHD website is really big. So
Okay,
you have
yeah.
to,
We'll send you the link.
you have to traverse a bit. It's pretty lengthy.
Other questions about the Jacksonville study?
Yes.
So, of the guardians that you person did not respond,
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was about guardians who did not give consent to talk to their family members. Some of them might not have just given consent, but we don't know why.
Some actively wrote that, my child doesn't have the capacity to participate in an interview and, things of that. So there was a perception that they couldn't provide information to us. And some said, well, you can talk to him, but you're not going to get anything. And we did.
Yes.
The 13% that felt they were somewhat worse off, could you sort of expand a little bit on what some of those reasons were?
That was just their perception. We don't know. Some of them. So we had open-ended questions about how they're doing, And some of them said that their family members had increased behavioral issues when they first moved, and they generally got better afterwards. So we can't say like this is the reason why they felt worse off, but that might be a reason. I don't know why. Do know?
And potentially some of those 13% went to their SODCs, right?
Yeah,
Because it was all
potentially.
lumped together.
Potentially.
Lisa?
I have a question about the and just as someone said that they wanted to move out and that they
Mhm.
do you know if that mom had an
Yeah, about on this is about on the slide that's our desire for more independence, and it was about if that mom had limited or total guardianship, primary guardianship. We don't know about that part of it. When the state when the state mailed out to all the guardians, I think that they mailed it out to all the primary guardians for each individual. Does that sound quite accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was to all. We think it meant they went to the primary guardians. No idea.
We've got a few minutes left. Mary Kay, is there anything else that you guys are doing at UIC? I know that, and you may not have been involved with it, but you guys did a similar study with respect to people's satisfaction in the LIGUS process,
Yes.
right?
And I don't work on the LIGUS one
Right.
per se, but that would be a nice consortium that you could do. That is Tamar Heller is working on that, and Kate Caldwell. And there are a few briefs on our website about that study, and I can send you the links to those.
It's ongoing. It's not.
Mhm.
They're in different phases, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, on the website too, we also have a brief for the 1-year follow-up for the Guardian survey. And again, it's fairly positive 1 year after this. So this was about 2.5 years after the closure.
any final questions? Please join me in thanking Vijay and Mary Kay. Really great information. Just a quick announcement. Our next meeting is going to be on May 28th. As I put in the email yesterday, it's actually on a Thursday instead of a Wednesday. And the reason we're doing that is Wednesday the 27th is oral argument in the Murray closure case, kind of a related topic. And a lot of us worked on that and wanted to participate or observe that. So we're just going to shift it a day later to the 28th, Thursday. And our topic is going to be the Chicago Human Rights Ordinance. There has been some recent amendments to that, and we're going to have somebody from the Commission, Abel Leon, and then Joe Russo from the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, who worked on that, and they're going to explain some of the changes, and some of us were involved in recommending some changes, and we'll get to see how many of the recommendations they followed. So we'll do that. And then just moving forward, we'll have our meeting in June. We're going to have Mark Weber back from the DePaul Law School to talk about some new trends in special education law. And then in July, we're going to have Karen Tamley, the Commissioner for the Mayor's Office of People with Disabilities, to talk about the work of her office and some of their initiatives and getting feedback from all of us. So we've got some good programs planned for the next 3 sessions. The next 2 sessions will be eligible for continuing legal education credit because they'll be presented by attorneys. So keep that in mind, and we'll send out all the links that Mary Kay and BJ mentioned today in an email soon that will, if people want to dig deeper on some of these issues that we talked about, you'll have those resources as well. So thanks very much for participating, and thanks to you on the web and the phone for getting through the technology woes we had a little bit. Hopefully it wasn't too distracting. And hope to see you next month.